He laughed in my face when I told him I wouldn't contest the divorce. He said I could keep the apartment as if it was some act of mercy, while he'd take everything else. To him, I was just a plain, dependent housewife, someone who'd crumble without his money. But what he didn't know was that the very company he'd been bragging about in court, the one he thought he owned, had quietly become mine. And when the judge read out the final verdict, his laughter stopped. That was the day he realized what karma really means. I wasn't always this calm. In fact, the first time I met Ethan, I thought I'd won the lottery. He was everything a 25-year-old woman dreamed of. Confident, charming, and reckless in a way that felt exciting. We met at a networking event downtown. I was an assistant at a small marketing firm, still paying off student loans, while he was the rising star in finance. He had that Wall Street energy, the expensive suit, the smug smile, the way people moved when he entered a room. He noticed me standing by the snack table, nervously clutching my wine glass, pretending to belong. "Networking or surviving?" he'd asked, smirking. "Both," I'd replied, and he laughed, the same careless, magnetic laugh that would later haunt me. Within months, he swept me off my feet. Expensive dinners, rooftop dates, weekends in the Hamptons. He made me feel seen, special, like I was stepping into a better version of myself. And when he proposed, under the glittering lights of Central Park, I said yes without hesitation. It felt like a fairy tale. Except, fairy tales don't warn you that the prince can become the villain once the vows are signed. The first few years of our marriage were beautiful, at least from the outside. I left my job after he insisted. "You don't need to work, baby. Focus on the home, on us. I'll take care of everything." It sounded romantic at first. Who wouldn't want a break from the grind? But slowly, "I'll take care of everything," turned into, "You wouldn't understand." Then, "You're lucky you don't have to deal with this stuff." And eventually, "You wouldn't survive a day without me." That last one stayed with me. I wasn't naive. I saw the shift, the late nights, the whispered calls, the unexplained trips. I told myself he was just stressed. Every marriage has ups and downs. Until one night I found a hotel receipt in his jacket pocket. Not for one night. For 3. I sat on the couch, staring at the paper, my hands shaking. The hotel was in Soho, the same one he said he'd been having client meetings at. I waited for him to come home that night. When he finally stumbled in, reeking of expensive whiskey and lies, I asked, "Who's she?" He didn't even bother to deny it. He just sighed, poured himself another drink, and said, "You always read too much into things, Claire." That was the first time I realized something cold. Ethan wasn't just unfaithful. He was cruel. Over the next few months, he started gaslighting me, calling me paranoid, dramatic, unstable. He began controlling every expense, cutting down my access to our joint account, questioning every small purchase. When I mentioned getting back into work, he laughed. "Work? What are you going to do? Answer phones again? You've been out of the game for years. No one would hire you." That laugh again, that cruel, condescending sound. It was the same laugh I'd hear in court years later, just before it vanished from his throat. But I didn't crumble. I started to plan. I opened a small side business under my maiden name. Just a blog at first, writing about marketing strategies and small business growth. I needed something that was mine again. Then, slowly, it grew. Brands started reaching out for consultation. I realized that the skills I'd built before marriage hadn't disappeared. They'd just been buried under his shadow. By the second year, I had a client base, a small remote team, and investors asking to buy stakes. And all the while, Ethan thought I was just running errands and hosting brunches. He had no idea I'd started working with a friend from my old firm, Mark, who'd quietly brought me in on a massive startup project. We specialized in digital marketing automation, and when one of Ethan I.'s investment clients wanted to expand into tech, Mark introduced our company as a potential partner. Ethan never realized the businesswoman sitting quietly across the dinner table was about to become his next superior. Because the startup grew fast, faster than we expected, and within 2 years, we acquired one of the smaller finance firms that Ethan's company relied on, his firm. That's when the irony began. He would come home ranting about new partners taking control of his deals, about some faceless board member making big decisions. He had no idea I was that faceless partner. I sat in silence every time he complained, pouring his drink, pretending to listen, my heart pounding with quiet satisfaction. He thought I was weak, dependent, replaceable. I let him believe it, because revenge tastes better when it's served cold and silent. Then, one morning, I got the email. Subject: petition for divorce. Ethan Reynolds versus Claire Reynolds. No explanation, no warning. Just a PDF attached, filed with the state court. I sat in the kitchen, the city's morning hum echoing through the window, as I read the words over and over. He didn't even have the decency to tell me himself. When he came home that night, he smiled. That same smug smile that used to charm me. "It's better this way," he said. "We've both grown apart. I'll make sure you're taken care of. You can keep the apartment." He said it like he was giving me a favor. He laughed when I told him I wouldn't contest it. That laugh again. But in that moment, I felt something shift inside me. Like all the pain, all the humiliation, had turned into steel. I smiled back and said, "Of course, Ethan. Whatever makes you happy." He didn't realize that was the first time I lied to his face. Because while he was filing for divorce, I was preparing for war. The silent kind, where the battlefield is paper and power.
I wish I could say I was surprised when I found out about her, the other woman, but by then I wasn't even angry. I was just tired. Tired of being invisible. Tired of being spoken to like a burden instead of a partner. Tired of pretending we still had something worth saving. Her name was Vanessa Young, beautiful, the kind of woman who posted filtered brunch photos and called herself an entrepreneur because she sold handbags on Instagram. I saw her once. Ethan didn't know that. She came into the restaurant where I used to meet my old friend Lily. They sat 2 tables away from us, Ethan, Vanessa, and that same smug look on his face. He was holding her hand, laughing, feeding her pieces of steak like I never existed. I remember Lily reaching across the table, her hand over mine. "Don't look," she whispered, but I did. I looked and I smiled, because what Ethan didn't know was that the waiter serving them was one of my employees' brothers. And when he handed me their receipt later that night, I quietly added another note to my mental list. Never confront, just collect. After that night, I stopped reacting to Ethan altogether. I became colder, quieter, deliberate. He took it as acceptance, thought I'd finally given up. What he didn't realize was that every calm nod, every quiet, okay, was a calculated step. While he was busy showing off his new girlfriend on social media, I was buying shares, silently increasing my ownership in the very tech firm that kept his company afloat. Every investment he bragged about at dinner parties, I already knew the details. Why? Because one of the firms supplying him information was mine. The house grew emptier with time. He stopped coming home on weekends. When he did, it was only to pick up more of his things. Expensive suits, watches, a laptop that wasn't even his. Once, I found a cufflink with her initials VM, resting on our nightstand. He didn't even try to hide it. I held it between my fingers for a long time that night, staring at the engraved letters. Then I placed it back exactly where I found it. That was the moment I realized something profound. I no longer wanted to hurt him. I wanted him to expose himself. A few weeks later, he served me a formal letter through his lawyer, a settlement proposal. It was insulting. He offered me the apartment, a small alimony package, and promised to cover basic expenses until I adjusted. As if he was cutting off a dependent, not divorcing a wife. When my lawyer read the documents, she looked up at me, eyes wide. "Claire, this is outrageous. You could challenge this. You're entitled to half of everything." I smiled. "No," I said quietly. "I'll sign because by then, I already had more than half." Ethan mistook my silence for surrender. He flaunted his new life online, posting pictures of expensive dinners, vacations, and Vanessa posing beside sports cars that were technically still leased. I stopped watching, not because it hurt, but because I was too busy finalizing something bigger. You see, Ethan's firm, Reynolds Capital, had a liquidity problem. The board had been struggling for months to find a stable investor. They didn't know that the anonymous venture group offering 2 by 51% was me. I created a shell company under an investment trust. My lawyer, my accountant, and a discreet broker handled the rest. Within 3 months, the deal was done. And just like that, I became the majority owner of my husband's company. He didn't know, not yet. He still strutted around, oblivious, bragging about expansion and upcoming partnerships. Sometimes, I'd overhear his phone calls, the way he complained about bureaucrats slowing him down, not realizing that I was the one reading every report he signed. He was building an empire for me without knowing it. But arrogance has a way of writing its own downfall. Ethan started taking money from the firm. Small transfers, then larger ones. He thought he could hide them through layered accounts and offshore consulting fees. He didn't realize I'd already hired a forensic accountant to trace every cent. By the time he filed for divorce, I already had enough to bury him financially if I wanted to. Still, I waited. I wanted him to walk into that courtroom believing he'd already won, because there's something poetic about watching a man destroy himself with confidence. The night before our court hearing, he called me drunk, slurring, smug. "You know, Claire, you'll be fine," he said. "I'll make sure you get the apartment. Maybe you can rent it out once I move into the penthouse." His words were a knife, but I'd built armor by then, so I just said softly, "Thank you, Ethan. You've always been so generous." He laughed again, that laugh I'd grown to despise. "See, that's why I never felt guilty. You're reasonable. You know your place." He hung up, and I stared at the silent phone, whispering to myself, "You're about to find out what my place really is." That night, I barely slept. Not because I was nervous, but because I was calm. Too calm. I made tea, looked out over the New York skyline, and thought about how far I'd come from the naive girl who once believed love meant surrender. Somewhere between heartbreak and silence, I'd rebuilt myself. And in the morning, when I stepped into that courthouse, wearing a dark navy suit and heels that echoed against the marble floor, I didn't feel like the abandoned wife. I felt like a woman walking into her own victory. Ethan was already there, sitting with his attorney. He turned when he saw me, smirked, then whispered something to Vanessa, who was seated right beside him, legs crossed like she owned the place. I simply smiled back. Because the thing about power, it's most dangerous when it looks harmless. The courtroom smelled like old wood and quiet tension. The kind of place where lives weren't just judged. They were rearranged. I sat beside my lawyer, Melissa Kent, a woman known in Manhattan for dismantling unfaithful husbands like a hobby. But today, I didn't need her to fight. I needed her to wait, because the real battle had already been won, long before we walked in. Ethan entered the courtroom with the confidence of a man who believed the role belonged to him. He wore a tailored charcoal suit, his watch glinting under the fluorescent lights, the same watch he once told me I didn't understand the value of. Vanessa strutted beside him in a tight white dress, like she thought this was the Met Gala instead of a legal proceeding. They sat across the room, clicking whispers, casting smug glances in my direction. Ethan lifted his chin at me. A silent message. "You lost." I folded my hands, steady and unshaken, and nodded politely in return. Let him think that. When Judge Holloway entered, the room fell silent. She was a sharp-eyed woman in her 60s, the kind of judge who could see the truth dripping off a person before they even spoke. "Good morning," she said. "We're here for the divorce proceedings of Ethan Reynolds and Claire Reynolds. Let's begin." Ethan's lawyer, Mr. Porter, rose first, chest puffed like a proud rooster. "Your Honor, my client is prepared to offer a very generous settlement package." Generous. The word almost made me laugh. He continued. "Mrs. Reynolds has been largely dependent on Mr. Reynolds throughout the marriage. She has no significant income, no business assets, and minimal financial involvement. We propose that she keep the marital apartment and receive temporary spousal support for 1 year." Marissa leaned over to me. "Do you want me to object?" I shook my head. "Not yet." Ethan crossed his legs, relaxed, smiling as though this was a business deal he'd mastered. He whispered something to Vanessa, and they laughed. Actually laughed. I kept my eyes forward. Judge Holloway turned to Marissa. "Ms. Kent, does your client accept the proposed settlement?" Marissa stood. "Your Honor, Mrs. Reynolds has reviewed the offer." She glanced down at me, and she does not contest it. A murmur rippled through the courtroom. I saw Ethan smirk. Exactly as planned. Judge Holloway nodded. "Very well. Before we finalize, I will review the financial disclosures from both parties." This was the moment everything aligned. Mr. Porter strutted forward with a binder. "Your Honor, my client has submitted all required statements for Reynolds Capital, including income projections and declared assets, as per your request." Judge Holloway adjusted her glasses and skimmed the papers. She murmured. "I see the company recently experienced a shift in its ownership structure." Ethan nodded confidently. Yes, Your Honor. I maintain primary control. 51% of the shares are under my name. 51%. Even now he believed it. No one had told him the paperwork had processed that morning. Judge Holloway frowned. That's strange. According to the corporate filings updated at 8:42 a.m. today, that percentage is no longer accurate. Ethan blinked. What? His lawyer stiffened. Your Honor, that must be an error. She turned another page. No. It appears the majority stake 51% now belongs to a different individual. My heart beat steady, slow, cold. Prepared, Ethan's face shifted, confusion twisting into annoyance. I don't understand. Who would? Judge Holloway looked up. Mrs. Claire Reynolds. The room froze. Everything, the whispering lawyers, the clicking heels in the back row, even Vanessa's gum chewing went silent. Ethan jerked backward. What? No, that's impossible. His voice cracked. Marissa rested a calming hand on my shoulder. I didn't move. Judge Holloway continued. It seems Mrs. Reynolds, through a private investment trust, acquired controlling interest over the past 4 months. She turned the page again, and according to the documents, the remaining board members have already acknowledged her position as the new majority shareholder. Ethan's color drained. His mouth opened, closed. He looked at me like he was seeing a ghost. You did this? I met his stare calmly. I did. He stumbled to his feet. No, this is fraud. Claire, you don't even understand how my company works. Judge Holloway raised a hand sharply. Mr. Reynolds, sit down, but he was unraveling. You can't just buy my company. That's illegal. That's my business. That's my entire life. His lawyer tried to pull him down. Ethan, stop. He ripped his arm away. Stop what she played us. She lied to me. She pointed at me across the courtroom. All these years I supported you, and this is how you repay me. The irony almost made my lips twitch. Supported me. He had emotionally starved me, belittled me, treated me as a shadow. Judge Holloway cleared her throat. Mr. Reynolds, your financial records also show unreported transfers totaling $470,000. Over the last 8 months, Ethan froze. You will need to explain these discrepancies, as they indicate potential misuse of company funds. Vanessa slowly uncrossed her legs. Ethan, what is she talking about? He didn't answer, because he couldn't. Judge Holloway looked at me with a subtle nod, a nod of respect. Mrs. Reynolds, as the majority shareholder, you are entitled to protect company assets. Your financial disclosures are thorough and accurate. The court acknowledges your rightful position. My lawyer leaned in and whispered, Now we object. She rose. Your Honor, given the updated financial data, Mrs. Reynolds would like to revise her stance. She will no longer accept the proposed settlement. Ethan turned ghost pale. What? What are you doing? Marissa continued. Mrs. Reynolds will instead pursue her rightful share based not on dependency, but on her significant financial contributions. Judge Holloway nodded. That is within her rights. Ethan sagged into his chair for the first time. He looked small, powerless, lost. I didn't smile. Because real power doesn't need to gloat. The courthouse was colder than I expected. Maybe it was the air conditioning, or maybe it was the way Eric kept glaring at me from across the room, smirking like he'd already won. He sat beside Sabrina, the woman who had helped destroy my marriage. She wore a tight beige dress and sunglasses indoors as if she were some celebrity avoiding paparazzi. Eric whispered something in her ear, and they both laughed. I kept my eyes down. I had learned a long time ago that reacting only fed him more power. Today, I wasn't going to give him anything. My lawyer, Ms. Klein, leaned toward me. Remember, she whispered, say nothing unless the judge speaks to you, and trust the process. He walked in here ready to brag. Let him. I nodded. My heart wasn't racing. It was steady, controlled, prepared, because I knew what was coming. Mr. Conway, the judge said. You may begin. Eric rose from his seat like a man preparing to receive applause. Clearing his throat dramatically, he stepped into the witness box and put on his biggest, fakest smile. Thank you, Your Honor, he began. I'll be brief. He was never brief. In this marriage, he said proudly, I was the primary provider. I paid for everything, our home, our vacations, our cars. Her education? I stiffened. My education. The man didn't pay for a single semester of it. Ms. Klein scribbled that down without looking up. Eric continued. My wife stopped working because she wanted to. I supported her financially, emotionally, completely. He said emotionally like he wasn't. The same man who ignored me for months at a time. He kept going. I'm simply requesting what's fair. I want ownership of my company, Conway Capital Partners, full access to our marital savings and control of our joint investments. My wife can keep the apartment. She doesn't need more than that. He actually said it with pride. As if giving me a one-bedroom apartment was some charitable donation, the judge raised a brow. And what is your company valued at, Mr. Conway? Eric brightened. Well, Your Honor, at the moment our valuation is Ms. Klein stood up. Objection, she said calmly, to the implication that Conway Capital Partners is his company. A murmur rippled through the room. Eric blinked. What? What do you mean, implication? Ms. Klein smiled the way a shark smiles right before it strikes. The defense will prove ownership shortly. Your Honor, please allow him to continue. The judge nodded. Eric swallowed, suddenly less confident. As I was saying, he muttered, the company is valued at a lot, and I worked hard for it. She didn't contribute to the business at all. He said it slowly, as if trying to convince himself. Ms. Klein made another note. Eric finally stepped down. He was smirking, but it wasn't as wide as before. He could sense something. He just didn't know what. The judge turned to me. Mrs. Conway, you may approach. I stood up calmly, smoothing my skirt. I saw Eric whisper to his lawyer. She's too scared to talk. Watch. His lawyer didn't reply. I stepped into the witness box, placed my hand on the Bible, and swore the oath. Mrs. Conway, the judge said gently, do you have anything you'd like to present to the court before we proceed with the division of assets? Yes, Your Honor, I said softly. I do. Eric leaned back smugly. He truly thought he knew everything about me. I turned slightly and nodded at Ms. Klein. She handed the judge a thick folder of documents with blue labels. For the court's review, she said, we submit Exhibits A through H, full transfer agreements, verifying signatures, notarized contracts, board approvals, and the official amendment filed with the state of New York. The judge flipped through the papers, expression unreadable. Eric frowned. Wait, what is that? What is she submitting? His lawyer quietly said. This wasn't in discovery. No kidding, Eric snapped. Sabrina sat up straighter. I kept my eyes front. The judge finally spoke. These documents state that all shares of Conway Capital Partners were transferred to Mrs. Conway 14 months ago. The room gasped. Eric froze. His jaw opened, but nothing came out. The judge continued reading. It also states that the transfer was voluntary, compensated, and fully executed by the CEO. You, Mr. Conway, exploded. That's impossible. I never sold her my company. Ms. Klein stood, her voice steady. You didn't sell it, Mr. Conway. You gave it away, as collateral. When you needed cash for your failing expansion project, Eric's face drained of color. I spoke softly into the microphone. You said you needed a temporary investor, I reminded him. Someone you could trust, someone who would stay out of your way. His eyes widened with dawning horror. You said, I continued, that it didn't matter whose name was on the papers. You just needed the money fast. The judge turned to him. Mr. Conway, the documents show your signature on every page. Eric grabbed one of the sheets like it was on fire. This is fraud. She tricked me. Ms. Klein didn't even blink. Your Honor, we also submit Exhibit I, a video recording of Mr. Conway verbally agreeing to the terms. The courtroom screens lit up. It was Eric, sitting at our dining table, cocky, confident, bragging. Just sign it. Video Eric said, I'm not worried. It's only temporary. My business is too big to fail. In the video, I asked, You're sure you don't want your lawyer to look at it? He waved his hand dismissively. No need. You're my wife. What's the worst that could happen? The video ended. A silence so heavy fell over the courtroom that you could hear the fluorescent lights buzzing. The judge looked straight at him. Mr. Conway, this appears to be entirely your doing. Eric's real voice shook. No. This can't be happening. The judge flipped to the last page. This court recognizes that Conway Capital Partners is legally owned by Mrs. Conway. Eric slammed both hands on the table. No, that's my company. The judge glared. Sit down or I will hold you in contempt. He sank back into his chair, trembling. Sabrina slowly slid her chair away from his. The judge continued, voice steady. Since Mrs. Conway is the sole owner of the business and Mr. Conway left the marital home voluntarily, this divorce will proceed with her, retaining full ownership of the company, the savings and all marital assets, except those purchased solely by Mr. Conway after separation. Eric shook his head violently. What about my assets? The judge adjusted their glasses. According to your own filings, Mr. Conway, you claimed you had no significant personal assets separate from the marriage? Eric blinked, slowly, painfully. Realization punched him in the chest. He had filed everything joint so he could take it later. He had been greedy, and greed was his undoing. The judge turned to me. Mrs. Conway, you retain full ownership of the apartment as your husband requested. Eric flinched as if slapped. And, the judge added, you retain full ownership of Conway Capital Partners. The courtroom erupted in whispers. I stood still, calm, silent, steady. The judge struck the gavel. Court is adjourned. Eric rushed to me as soon as the judge walked out, red-faced, shaking. You ruined me, he hissed. You stupid, useless. Ms. Klein stepped between us so fast even I was surprised. You will not speak to my client that way. Eric tried to push past her, but 2 officers moved closer. Sabrina grabbed her purse and bolted for the door without a word. Eric yelled after her. Sabrina, don't you walk away from me? She didn't even turn around. That was the moment he finally broke. His knees buckled, his voice cracked, his hands shook as he pointed at me. You planned this, he whispered. You planned all of this. I spoke softly. No, Eric, you planned it. I just let it play out. His face crumpled, because he knew I was right. I picked up my bag, thanked Ms. Klein, and walked out of the courtroom. No dramatic speech, no triumphant declaration. Just quiet dignity. Outside, the New York sun felt warmer than it had in years. The world felt clearer, lighter. I stood on the courthouse steps and finally let out the breath I had been holding for months. Behind me, the heavy doors swung open. Eric stumbled out, shouting my name. This isn't over, but his voice sounded small, uncertain, weak. I didn't turn around. I didn't need to, because I had already won. The quiet one always has the loudest victory. The moment I stepped off the courthouse steps, the city felt different. The sounds of New York honking taxis, rushing pedestrians, vendors arguing over bagels, felt sharper, more alive, like the world had been waiting for me to catch up. For the first time in years, I wasn't walking in someone else's shadow. I was walking into my own future. That night, I returned to the apartment Eric so generously allowed me to keep, though he didn't know it had become my property entirely months before the trial. I stood in the living room and looked around. The apartment was small, cluttered with memories, and a little too quiet, but it was mine. I poured a glass of wine, sat on the couch, and let the silence wash over me. No footsteps pacing angrily, no lectures, no passive-aggressive sighs, no manipulation masked as concern, just peace. I opened my laptop, looked at the dashboard of Conway Capital Partners, my company and saw the numbers, the projects, the clients he used to brag about. I controlled all of it, and I smiled. For years, Eric screamed to be the center of everything. Suddenly, he had nothing. And I had everything he thought I wasn't worthy of. 3 days after the court ruling, the news broke. CEO Eric Conway removed from company. New ownership announced. Business blogs ran with it. Finance influencers dissected it. Employees whispered and forwarded screenshots. Someone even made a meme, Eric, sitting in court, with the caption, "When you sign away your company to your wife because you thought she was dumb," it went viral. I didn't laugh. Not outwardly, but inside. Oh, I laughed harder than I ever had in my life. Eric, meanwhile, flooded my phone with messages. "We can fix this. You're doing this to hurt me. It's not fair. Give me one more chance. I need this company. Answer me." I blocked him. The last text I saw before blocking said, "You'll never survive without me." The irony nearly knocked me over. Owning the company wasn't about revenge anymore. It became about opportunity. I called an emergency meeting with the board. They looked nervous, fearful, even because they expected anger, chaos, punishment. But I greeted them calmly. "Good morning," I said with a steady smile. "We're starting fresh," and I meant it. We removed Eric from all internal systems. We reassessed failing projects. We implemented fairer policies, especially for the women employees Eric had ignored and dismissed. Within 3 months, profits stabilized projects, revived investors returned, employees began smiling again. One of the oldest managers told me, "You're the best thing to happen to this company in years." It was the first time I realized something important. I wasn't just running the company out of spite. I was actually good at this. It happened on a rainy afternoon on Fifth Avenue. I had just come out of a meeting when I saw him, Eric, standing under a broken umbrella, soaked, wearing a suit that had definitely seen better days. He wasn't surrounded by admirers anymore. He wasn't laughing. He wasn't even pretending to be confident. He looked small. He saw me and froze. "Hey," he said awkwardly. "You look good." I nodded. "Thank you." He swallowed. "You know, I didn't think you had it in you." I held his gaze. "That's the problem, Eric. You never thought about who I was, only who you wanted me to be." He blinked rapidly. "I lost everything," he whispered. "My job, my money." "Sabrina left, everyone left. That's usually what happens," I said gently, "when the laughter is at other people's pain." He looked down, ashamed. Not angry, not vengeful, just broken. For a split second, I saw the man I married, the man I once loved, the man who threw it all away. I felt no hate for him, just distance, a life I had outgrown. "I'm sorry," he said quietly. "For everything." I believed him. But I also knew something else. Sorry doesn't undo scars. I stepped back. I hope you learn from this, I told him, truly, and I walked away. For the last time. 1 year later, I bought a new office, moved into a larger home, traveled for the first time alone, met people who respected me, not controlled me. Most importantly, I learned to love my own voice and silence. I learned silence was never weakness, it was strategy. I hired a therapist, started yoga, wrote a book proposal about financial empowerment for women, spoke at conferences about rebuilding after emotional manipulation. My story resonated with people, especially women who had been underestimated, dismissed, or silenced. I wasn't just surviving, I was becoming someone I never imagined I could be, someone powerful. People ask me sometimes, why didn't you expose him sooner? Why didn't you yell? Why didn't you fight louder? The truth, I didn't need to. Sometimes the quiet one isn't quiet because she's weak. Sometimes she's quiet because she's watching, she's learning, she's planning. And when the time finally comes, her silence becomes the loudest victory of all. The day Eric laughed in my face, he thought he won. The day the judge read my net worth, he realized the truth. He underestimated me. He thought I was small, forgettable, dependent. But the quiet one? The quiet one is usually the one writing the ending. And I wrote mine beautifully.